Echoes of the East Front. The sun dipped low behind the war-torn buildings, casting long shadows over the frozen streets where the remnants of a Soviet tank crew sought refuge from the biting cold. Sergei, the battle-hardened commander, scanned the desolate cityscape through his cracked binoculars, searching for any sign of their lost unit as his crew huddled together. The distant echo of artillery fire reverberated through the ruins, a grim reminder that they were deep behind enemy lines, cut off and alone in the heart of a devastated city. Victor, the youngest of the crew, tightened his grip on his rifle, his eyes wide with fear as he glanced at the crumbling buildings surrounding them, imagining threats lurking in every shadow. They advanced cautiously through the narrow alleyways, the clattering of their boots on the cobblestones the only sound in the eerie silence of the abandoned streets. As they turned a corner, the crew stumbled upon a destroyed marketplace, its stalls overturned and goods scattered, a testament to the chaos that had swept through the city. Nadia, a local woman with a scarred face and determined eyes, emerged from the shadows, her presence both a shock and a lifeline as she offered to guide them through the labyrinth. Sergei hesitated, but the desperation in her voice convinced him, and they followed her lead, hoping she would be their salvation in this hostile environment. They moved through the narrow backstreets, avoiding the main roads where snipers could lurk, the tension growing with each step as the city seemed to close in around them. Irina, an elderly woman with a stooped back, joined their small group, her age-worn hands clutching a small bundle, the contents of which remained a mystery to the crew. She spoke in hushed tones, sharing stories of the city's fall, her words painting a picture of despair and resilience, as they made their way through the maze of rubble. Victor listened intently, her tales of survival a stark contrast to the brutal reality he had witnessed on the battlefield, and he found a strange comfort in her presence. The night fell quickly, and they took shelter in the remnants of a bombed-out building, its walls offering little protection from the cold but enough to hide them from prying eyes. Sergei kept watch, his eyes scanning the darkness for any movement, his mind replaying the events that had led them here, the faces of fallen comrades haunting his thoughts. The crew shared a meager meal, the rations barely enough to sustain them, but they ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the weight of the war pressing down on them. Victor's thoughts drifted to home, to the family he had left behind, and he wondered if he would ever see them again as the war continued to tear lives apart. Nadia sat beside him, her presence a reminder of the civilians caught in the crossfire, her determination to survive a source of inspiration and guilt for the young soldier. The sound of distant explosions shook them from their reverie, and they knew they had to move before dawn, before the city came alive with the horrors of war once more. They moved through the city like ghosts, avoiding patrols and slipping through the cracks of the broken streets, guided by Nadia's intimate knowledge of the area. Irina led them to a hidden cellar, a place of refuge she had used many times before, and they rested there, grateful for the brief respite from the relentless pursuit of death. As they sat in the darkness, Sergei's thoughts turned to his family, and he wondered if they would ever know the sacrifices he had made, if they would even remember him. The crew slept in shifts, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on them, but the fear of discovery kept them alert, their nerves frayed by the constant tension. Victor dreamed of home, of the fields he used to run through as a child, but the dream turned dark, the fields becoming a battlefield, and he woke with a start. Nadia noticed his distress and offered him a piece of bread, her gesture simple but filled with unspoken understanding, a bond formed in the crucible of war. The dawn broke slowly, the pale light filtering through the cracks in the cellar, and they knew it was time to move again, the city's dangers waiting for them outside. Sergei led the way, his steps confident but his heart heavy with the burden of leadership, each decision weighing on him as they navigated the war-torn streets. They passed by a collapsed bridge, its twisted metal a symbol of the city's destruction, and Victor couldn't help but feel a pang of hopelessness as they crossed it. The sounds of battle grew louder as they approached the city's outskirts, and Sergei knew they were getting closer to their unit, but the dangers were far from over. A sudden burst of gunfire forced them to take cover in a nearby building, the walls shaking with the impact as the war raged on just outside their fragile sanctuary. Nadia pointed out a hidden path that would lead them around the worst of the fighting, and they moved quickly, their hearts pounding as they skirted the edges of the battlefield. Irina stumbled as they crossed a rubble-strewn street, and Victor was quick to help her, his youthful strength a stark contrast to her frailty, yet they both drew strength from each other. The city seemed to come alive with the sounds of war, the explosions and gunfire a constant reminder that they were still in the thick of it, still fighting to survive. Sergei's mind raced as they navigated the chaos, his thoughts a whirlwind of tactics and strategy, but also of the people who had been lost along the way. Nadia led them to a hidden bunker, a relic from before the war, and they took refuge there, the walls thick enough to block out the noise, if only for a moment. Victor marveled at the bunker's age, wondering how many people had sought shelter here before them, and if they had survived the horrors that now surrounded them. Sergei's eyes met Nadia's, and he saw the same determination in her that he felt in himself, a shared understanding of what it took to survive in this hellish place. Irina sat quietly, her hands resting on her bundle, and for the first time, she unwrapped it, revealing a small, worn photograph of her family, long lost to the war. The sight of the photograph stirred something in the crew, a reminder of what they were fighting for, and a moment of silence fell over them as they reflected on their own losses. The respite was short-lived as the sound of approaching tanks forced them to move again, their time in the bunker coming to an abrupt end as they fled into the night. Sergei led them through a narrow tunnel, the sound of the tanks growing louder behind them, and they emerged into the open air, the cold biting at their exposed skin. They were close now, close to their unit, but the danger was far from over as they navigated the final stretch, their hearts pounding with the fear of being discovered. Victor stumbled as they ran, his exhaustion finally catching up to him, but Sergei was there to pull him up, his grip strong and unyielding as they pressed on. The city was a maze of destruction, but Nadia's knowledge of the streets guided them through, her determination to see them to safety unwavering despite the odds. The crew could hear the sounds of their comrades ahead, the distant voices and machinery a beacon of hope in the otherwise silent city, urging them forward. A sudden explosion rocked the ground beneath them, and they were thrown to the ground, debris raining down as the war continued to tear the city apart. Sergei pulled himself up, his ears ringing from the blast, and he urged the crew to keep moving, the sound of their unit's radio chatter now tantalizingly close. Victor felt a surge of adrenaline as they neared the front lines, the familiar sounds of their comrades a comforting reminder that they were almost home. Nadia led them down a final alleyway, and there, in the distance, they saw the Soviet flag waving above the ruins, a symbol of their unit, their hope. The crew broke into a run, their exhaustion forgotten as they sprinted towards the flag, the promise of safety and reunion driving them forward. As they reached the front lines, the sight of their comrades filled them with relief, but the reality of the war they had just survived weighed heavily on their shoulders. Sergei's eyes scanned the faces of his fellow soldiers, and he saw in them the same weariness and resolve that he felt in his own heart, the scars of battle etched deep. Nadia, no longer just a guide but a comrade, was welcomed by the unit, her contribution to their survival recognized and honored by the men she had saved. Victor, now a soldier shaped by the horrors of war, stood beside Sergei, his youthful innocence replaced by the steely resolve of a man who had seen too much. Irina, her journey at an end, quietly left the group, her photograph clutched in her hand, disappearing into the city she had fought so hard to survive in. The crew watched her go, a silent acknowledgement of the resilience she had shown, and they knew they would never forget the people they had encountered. As the crew settled back into their unit, the war continued around them, but they knew they were no longer the same men who had entered the city, their experiences forever altering them. Sergei looked out over the ruins, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the war would leave its mark on all who survived, both soldier and civilian alike. The crew gathered around their tank, the machine that had carried them through hell and back, and they silently vowed to honor the lives lost and the lives they had saved. As they prepared for the next battle, they knew that the echoes of the Eastern Front would stay with them, a haunting reminder of the cost of war, both in blood and in spirit.